So if when I'm facing you and I say left foot forwards or left hand or something like that, it'll be my right hand. But if I'm facing the other way, then it'll be the other way around. I mean, sometimes I get it wrong, but that's what I aim to do. It can get a bit confusing up here sometimes. But we don't need to bother about that for the moment. This is just a straightforward exercise. Doesn't matter which way you start. Feet below your hips, and just this sense of dropping. It's not a deep posture, this one, especially not at the beginning. And really and truly, this stance, sometimes referred to as the Wu Chi stance, is the one that we want to be able to move into comfortably. Quite often in different movements that we do, we might go deeper for various reasons, and you might sort of, if you're going to push something, then you might sort of drop down a little bit more. But from a kind of everyday point of view, this stance is the one that we're wanting to be in as we move around in our lives. Many people in Tai Chi, myself included, use deeper stances. That gives us a greater sense of the root and so on and so forth. But in the faster forms in Tai Chi, a lot of Tai Chi forms, these sequences are often done in quite low stances. Depends partly on the style of the Tai Chi being practiced. But when they do the fast forms, they tend to be in a higher stance. And you can be in a very deep stance and you can make all these movements, but you haven't got much mobility when you do this. What you want to be able to do is to move around. Now, if you're stiff, that's not going to work. You drop your weight a little bit and so on and so forth. If you want an idea of how that works, have a look on YouTube at MMA, mixed martial arts competitions. It can be a bit brutal, but it's quite interesting sometimes to watch. Or even boxing. The only time you see people go into deeper stances might be if they're actually grappling, standing grappling. So they're locked together. You sometimes see people kind of trying to go down further. But there's a limit to how much you can do that with any particular advantage. Turning from your hips and waist. So effectively, to start off with, just think of this as a movement of your upper body. Imagine it's like a separation between what we think of as upper and lower body. So that as I come forward, so you can see, as I turn, I'm trying to avoid this twisting of my knees as much as I can. And you'll find that you start to make adjustments to account for the fact that it's quite natural, really, for your legs to be pulled in. But that's also restrictive of the movement. If I turn further, then eventually there's nothing I can do to stop my legs responding. So when we sink down like this, we drop our center of gravity one way or another. I often use the image that lower back and hips and buttocks are overhanging rather than directly above the legs. So here, my weight is forward, my knees are above the balls of my feet, and I sink back, and my hips are more above my ankles. That kind of thing. And this creates a certain amount of what we might call space for movement in our hips, the whole of the center of our body between hips and pelvis and waist, which means that the upper body can just swing freely to a certain extent. That's really all this exercise asks us to do at this point. As you get more experienced in this, you may find that you turn a little bit here, and then there's just a natural sort of continuation of your shoulders. As I say, that's something that just happens. Don't try and make it happen. But again, we should try and keep that feeling of spaciousness all the way up through the body. Here I'm fine. I could stand here for a while. There's no sense of tightening in my upper body. But as soon as I go to here, I can now feel muscles and tendons beginning to sort of lock up a little bit. I might be able to find a bit more space by sinking lower. That's one of the things that the lower postures can give us. But again, there will be limits to that. Eventually, it's all going to fall apart. Arms are quite heavy. My first teacher always used to say, imagine you've got heavy shopping bags in each hand. So a feeling of pulling through your arms and wrists and fingers. Perhaps an image of moving through water, giving you much the same effect, and encouraging our body to move in a way that is much more connected. This is, again, a very natural thing for our bodies to do. We do it all the time. If I just wave my arm around like that in thin air, I can just do this. I can move from my elbow and so on and so forth. If I decide that I want to move the punch bag, make sure it stays there, I can't. That's not doing anything. So now I have to push a little bit harder, and my body just naturally adjusts to the change. It's the same kind of process that says that, you know, sometimes it happens all the time, doesn't it, these days? Well, does me. There's a ring at the doorbell. You open the door. There's a big box on the doorstep, just been delivered. You go to pick it up and say, oh, it's heavy. So you go back down again, and without even having to think about it, you change how you move. So when there's resistance, we move in a different way. We use the muscles differently, and we tend to use more of the body. And this is something that we want to develop in Tai Chi, not only in terms of, oh, well, I'm not just going to use my arms, I'm going to use my legs as well, perhaps. Or I'm not just going to use my forearm, I'm going to use my whole arm. But also in the sense that we can deepen the movement. It's not just about the muscles. And there's a number of things that are involved in Tai Chi as we begin to practice these arts and recognize that when we make a movement, of course the muscles are involved, but so are tendons and ligaments and fascia. And the movement itself, the feel of the movement, the feel of the energy can begin to change. So the addition of the image of moving through water at this point, if it's a useful one for you, is very useful. Another idea is that you imagine the air around you is somehow thicker than normal. I find the image of being in water works very well for me. So this gives us an idea of how we want the movements to feel when we come to the slower exercises. There is, of course, another element to this, which is that it's slightly faster. It's not a massively energetic exercise, but you're going a bit faster than most of what we do in Tai Chi. So it should have a very gentle effect on your heartbeat and your circulation. So just raising your body temperature a little bit, getting oxygen to the brain, the things that you would expect from any kind of warm-up for any kind of physical activity, and useful things in their own right as well. This is a very common exercise, perhaps the most common exercise that you'll find in the Tai Chi world. And a useful one for first thing in the morning. So the first thing I tend to do when I start to practice in the morning is this, and I'll do this, and it feels like it's a kind of slow, gentle waking up. And I don't have any set idea about what's going to come next. I have a range of these. There's a number of variations that I go through, but I'm not going to try and go through them all. The principle is still the same, whichever one you do. So just raise your arms a little bit. The actual position of your arm is this, in front of your shoulder slightly, elbow hanging down, at a comfortable height, no higher than your shoulders. And this can sometimes encourage that movement from the center of the body, but make sure that in raising your arms, you haven't done this, you haven't pushed your hips up, and you're sort of doing this. Shoulders should drop down. In fact, shoulders have a feeling of being pulled down by the weight of your elbows. And a favorite variation of mine, have one foot forwards, keep the width of your step. Now is to move your weight. So from the side, it looks like this. And this is good because it brings your legs into the action a bit more obviously. You do want to be careful with this back leg in particular being pulled too far out of line. It's not a massive problem to start off with because there's less weight in that, but make sure when you go back, you're not stiffening up in the knee. And play around with this a little bit. Sometimes I think of it in terms of a push from the leg. Sometimes I think of it in terms of a turn in the center. I'm in the back leg. I turn towards the front leg. That draws my weight forwards. Sometimes a combination of both. They're all just different aspects to this movement. But again, you know, getting the blood circulating in your legs, warming up the joints of your body. Remember, particularly when it's chilly, joints will stiffen up because the synovial fluid in the joints congeals. A bit of movement and warmth makes that a lot more fluid. So knees, ankles will benefit from this. And on the other side, just make sure of the width of your step. And then if you turn your front foot out a little bit, you'll tend to turn a little bit further. That will pull more on that back leg. And instead of trying to push the knee out, as I've described before, let your heel come up. And when you go back, let your toes come up. So you're starting to draw the empty leg in. Where am I here? And you can step in and out. Just be careful where you place the foot down. So this is good because although we can see quite clearly the connection between the center of our body and our arms, it's not so clear when we take the connection down to our feet and our legs, but the connection is very much there. Then try that on the other side. First of all, without moving your feet, fixed step. Remember hip width across your feet. Raising the toes and your heel. Really, at this point, all you need to do, say with the back foot at this stage, is to raise your toes. Just lift the foot very, very slightly, and it comes in. And maybe even all the way through. It's a semicircle when it does that. Well, mostly I couldn't get it right then. That's better. So we start to get this lovely feeling of our leg, which again is quite heavy, heavier than the arm, of course. Hanging slightly from your hip. This is a very good way of refreshing your legs. And of course, we can do that on both sides. Just make a point of dropping into what will be the supporting leg. Soften your hip. Don't be in a hurry with this. Let your arms just follow the movement in whatever way is the most relaxed way. So later in the class, when we come to the slow stepping, we would do this, and the front foot is slightly turned out. And this gives us that turn. You can see my hip coming around. We're looking for that same fluidity of movement through the leg. Obviously, being stable and aligned over the front leg is key to that. But now come back to the Ruchi stance. Just stand in for a moment in this stance. I'm going to move back a bit, otherwise my hand will disappear from the screen. Hips dropping back. And with that dropping of your center of gravity, you get a stronger feel through our legs, but also through our back. The front of the body, belly, solar plexus, ribs, just hanging very, very slightly. This can feel very odd to begin with, but it actually helps to release some of the tightness in the upper part of the body and allows for a slightly deeper breathing process. And by deeper, I mean, rather than seeing all of our breath being about the rib cage, trying to push the ribs out, it's actually expanding in belly and solar plexus to allow the lungs space to expand downwards as well as outwards. And then just let your hips sink back a little bit more, feeling stronger feeling in your legs until you get pushed up. And then you sink. So the rooting down, the dropping of your center of gravity, the first thing to welcome about it really is that it does help to change your posture overall, carrying less weight on the upper part of your body, and subsequently a release of some of the tightness and stiffness there, more stable, because the lower your center of gravity, the more stable you are. Those are very, very useful outcomes. And then with an exercise like this and some of the subsequent exercises, you realize that actually when we do go deeper, it's a stronger feeling of being pushed up. Your body expands and then contracts. It's like if you've got a ball and you go to bounce it, you just let the ball drop, it will rise a certain amount. If you want it to go higher, you want more energy in the process. You might throw it at the ground to get a stronger response. So it feels as though there's a sort of rising energy that comes up and expands up through your body and then drains away again. So the opposite movement to the rising up, the yielding movement, the yielding to the pull of gravity, allowing gravity to draw your hips and your center of gravity down, is perhaps a good place to think of initiating any of the movements that we do. Now changing to the wild goose. This is true whether or not we're actively dropping our hips further. All of the exercises use as a bare minimum that basic Wu Chi stance. So the feeling of overhanging in your hips is a fairly constant one. So there's always a movement downwards, and there'll always be the responsive movement upwards as an outcome from that, as a result of that. We just get a bit extra here, but we would always bring our attention back to the idea of yielding to the pull of gravity, to rooting down, really on a regular basis. So this requires a certain amount of training in our attention, in our minds, to maintain that awareness. This time, drop your hands down, part in the clouds, because it's easy to forget to do that. So really, these opening exercises give us a chance to practice and to train that aspect of it, because our hips are actively going up and then actively going down. We can bring our thoughts back down. You can bring them to your feet, or to the feeling of the ground beneath your feet, or whatever is most appropriate for you to focus on. And this in its turn gives us the sort of regular sense of just settling, quietening. The term Tai Chi refers to an old concept and the interplay of the two opposites of yin yang, light, dark, large, small, and in this case, sinking down and pushing out. And both sides of that equation are important to us. We often overlook the stillness aspect of it. And to my mind, this is one of the great benefits of the practice of Tai Chi. And change to dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Just focusing on the expansion upwards through one side of your body, rotating from the shoulder and then drawing down. On the other side. So you can see the top of my hand. Try and get into the habit of following the movement. Feel the extension through that side of your body, and then feel the contraction as you sink down. Draw your arm down. Switch to the other side. And this drawing of your attention back into your body in one way or another, and ideally, as I said, back to the ground and your feet and your root, is actually one of the very useful tools that we get from the practice, because it's always available to us. So those moments of stress, whether it be stuck in a traffic jam or having some kind of dispute with somebody, or too busy, or whatever is the source of the stress, can actually start to be neutralized just by bringing your attention back. It's what is really a very sort of gentle, encouraging process rather than a forced calm. One more time. Coming back to this position, just staying down here. So not locking up. Now, like this, I haven't got any sense of movement down. I'm resisting that movement downwards. Like this, I'm allowing for that movement downwards and feeling the push up. Hands to your sides. And pushing up, pushing in 4 directions. So that's the first direction. And then you push your hands out sideways. At the same time, you turn in the center of your body. Second direction. Third direction is in the opposite way. And the fourth direction is pushing out sideways and facing forwards. So the change comes predominantly here in the area between hips and waist. Start again. This brings a new aspect to what we're doing. Up until now, I've been talking about your hips dropping, making you aware of your feet, and your root, and so on and so forth. Now we can start to think of this whole area of the body dropping down through or between our legs. So we have a physical center to the body. We also have a concept, if you like, of a center. That conceptual aspect really can be extended into your feet. So you're not leaving your feet behind, but you've expanded the idea a little bit to feel what's happening here in the physical center of your body. This becomes another common point of focus, another very useful point of focus. The term centered is not a metaphor in Tai Chi. We literally move from our center. The center part of the body is sometimes described as being like the hub of a wheel. Remember how when we were doing the faster movements with the stepping, it was the turning in the center that actually helped us to take the step. Here we can see how it's affecting shoulders, arms, and hands. Now let your hands drop down, circling palms, pushing away through one side, feeling your arms spring up, and then down, Just notice whether you've sort of come up, stiffened up. It's very common for that to happen. So always check. The worst that can possibly happen when you check is that you find out that you're doing it correctly. And there is still a benefit to that because the act of checking reinforces your overall awareness. And then if it's comfortable, again, using the center of your body, add the turn. And then switch to the other side. And again, if it's comfortable, add in the turn. And let your arms rest. Sinking down and pushing up. So we've discovered that when we turn in the center of our body, we can affect arms and legs. A little bit more subtle, but really very important is that if we rotate vertically, so what I'm going to do now is, as I sink down, I'm going to push my hips back. And what happens is I tilt forwards. To bring my head back upright, I let my hips drop back and don't strain in the upper part of my, try not to strain in the upper part of my back. So I'm not lifting my head so much as I am using the kind of leverage principle to draw my head up. Imagine having a child on a seesaw. You could go to one end of the child is and try and lift them up and push them up. That's no fun at all. You go to the other end and you just lean on it and push down, and you're using your weight, you're using gravity to help lift the child. And in the same way, we can use gravity and the action of gravity on our hips to help us to bring our head up. The next two exercises make use of this. First one is rowing a boat in the middle of the lake with an extension in your back. I'm doing this quite big, so hopefully you can see what I'm doing, but just go very carefully with this. You don't have to go down deep or go out a long way. This is the action. Let your hands drop and then come back to the rooted position. Push up a little bit and start all over again. One more time. And then polishing the table, turn first and then push your hips back, then swing around and let the hips drop down again. Show you from behind, turn, push back with your hips, let your hands go forwards, swing around, and hands are roughly hip height. Imagine they're on the table and they would get pushed forward. If they were sliding across the table, pushing your hips back like this will send your shoulders forwards. and your arms would just swing around quite easily. If that doesn't work for you, you could imagine having a big ball there and just turning the ball around, rolling the ball around. That latter image has an advantage in the sense that you could imagine it to be quite a heavy ball. And so all the things I was saying about how our body responds to greater resistance, they well come into play there. One more time. Good. And then shake out. We'll go into the bow stance in a moment. Before we do, to go back to this movement of the legs, what we might think of as normal walking, actually, mostly what we do is we tilt forward slightly. I'm exaggerating. This sends our center of gravity forwards. And actually, what happens is our body responds by swinging the leg forward. So that's still using the pelvis. When we do the walking in Tai Chi, we're not doing that. The ordinary walking is great for distance, for momentum, for power. You know, if you're going to kick a football, you don't do this. You do this. You're going to kick it, swing it through. You use the momentum of the body. The same would be true in one way or another with the kicks in martial arts. But when we do the Tai Chi walking, we're working with a different aspect of this, one which we do use actually in everyday life. If you're walking somewhere, maybe on some water-covered rocks or on a slippery pavement, we tend to take shorter steps. The problem we get is this sometimes neutralizes the downward pull of the muscles. So we want to try and find of the hips. We want to try and find a bit of a balance between the momentum going forwards, but staying in touch with the ground. So a couple of aspects of this. Just watch for the moment. We will do it in a moment. I'm exaggerating. I turn that foot out. I go forwards. I turn. You can see my hip and my shoulder coming around there, and that will pull my heel up. Effectively, at this point, all I have to do is to flex my foot. My toes are off the ground, and my leg will swing in. And because it swings in, as we discovered before, it will swing out. From the front, it will look something like this. And what will happen is it will swing out again. So we need to be stable over, oops, he says falling over. We need to be stable over this leg. We need to be aligned. We need to drop our root down over the foot in order that the base that we're working from, because if you saw it happen there, if I go to do this and I've started, oops, it goes all over the place. The next stage of that would be to raise the foot. And the thing is, when you raise the foot, again, what we often do, but if you're climbing up a ladder or going up the stairs, we quite often we might tilt the pelvis in order to get a bigger lift. And again, in some circumstances that's appropriate, but for the walking that we do, think of your hip here. And actually, all I'm going to do, I bring my foot in, and if I want to take a higher step, I rotate the hip, and the hip brings the knee up. And that's all. So I get to here, and what I don't want to do is this, because now I'm wobbling around. So think about that when we come to the step in. Now have one foot forwards, keep the width of your step, and begin to just transfer your weight forwards and backwards gently. Keeping that lower stance. You'll feel it strong in the muscles of your legs. At the moment, you're getting about 60% of your weight in the front leg, maybe up to 70 in the back leg. Not enough for the stepping. So you go back and then you raise your front toes and you settle a little bit more in the back leg. Turning the front foot out a little bit can help. Go forwards, push your back knee forwards so the heel starts to come off the ground. Gradually more of your weight going into the supporting leg. Ideally, you get to a point where the only weight remaining in the supporting leg is the weight of the leg itself. And then all I'm going to do here is raise my back toes and contract the back foot, back leg. And then I'm going to expand the back leg and bring it in. Same thing with the front. I raise the toes, I draw the foot in, it contracts. It's almost like it's being pulled in from the hip and then it expands out. I can't remember which way round I was now. Like this. So it's this. And notice again, there's that little bit of a curve there. Something that's moving and attached at one end will tend to go round in a curving movement. So we maintain the hip width that way. It's quite tricky. Looking to maintain that feeling of a pull down on your hips the whole time. And give your legs a shake. It's tricky because one of the things that we're trying to do is to soften in the hips, to soften the body, to allow the center of gravity to drop. So it's the opposite of what we tend to do. So practicing this next to a wall can be really good. It gives you just a little bit of time to think about what you're doing, to analyze what you're doing. And sometimes when I do this, I will use the support, and I notice there's just a little bit of a tension setting in, or maybe a misalignment of my hip or something like that. Things that we don't always notice. So, on the other side now, first of all, transferring your weight. Raising heel and toes. So this casts an interesting light on walking. One that, as I say, needs to be balanced out with the everyday walking when we're just going to the shops or something like that. But one that is essential really, because if we go too far with the leaning forwards, obviously we're going to fall over. So now step in. And again, we can see the roll of the center. Our center's dropping down through our supporting leg. And I'm going to exaggerate the movements a bit. Really, we want to get to a point where we feel a little bit of movement there, maybe see just a little bit, but it's mostly a movement felt within the body rather than one that is actively seen. You go too far, eventually you're going to throw yourself off. And again, this is where those faster exercises can be quite useful. Feel those connections. So now coming through with the back foot and step forwards. Again, I'm exaggerating this a little bit, so hopefully you can see the movement in the upper part of my body. But if you try it that much, you may well find that you're getting a bit wobbly because there's a limit to how far you can do that. And then same thing going backwards. Good. And shake out. Worth practicing, really worth practicing. I mean, I still find after 40 years of doing Tai Chi that this is a valuable exercise and worth coming back to for all sorts of reasons. If for no other reason than the fact that, you know, walking is an important part of our lives for most of us. But it also has a very strong meditative element to it. So have your right foot forwards and fisherman cast a net. So again, various ways we can think of this, but I was talking about the idea of an increasing focus in that center part of your body. The center moves into your back foot, that draws your shoulders back, that draws your arms back. Your center rolls into the front foot, and so on and so forth. The center's facing forwards, straight ahead, and you're moving forwards and backwards, and your arms reflect that movement. So you're moving through water. Fisherman cast the net. This time when you go into your back foot, turn. So now make more or less the same movement, except your hands are coming across your body. One more addition is that you turn your hands so the palms of your hands face the direction of the movement. They're curving downwards and upwards as previously. So this time, as you go forward, just let them continue to curve and come over, sink back and turn. Draw your arms down towards your rear hip. So again, the center of the movement, the area that controls the hub of the movement, the control room, however you think of it, is that area between hips and waist. You turn there, you move there, your weight moves. That can engage your legs and your feet. It also moves your arms and hands. Good, okay. And then with the other foot forwards, fisherman cast a net. So we begin to fix a part of our attention in that center part of your body, its connection to the ground. And through that, its primary position in terms of how our body moves. Turning. And then Just letting the arms curve up, no higher than shoulder height, maybe not that high, and not too far from your body. Notice my elbows are still quite soft and hanging down. This time, when you go into your back foot, turn your front foot out. So now you'll come around probably a little bit further. That brings your back here up. And so our stepping, before we were moving two of our limbs from the center of the body. Now we're moving three. The third limb, of course, being the foot. But it's all the same movement. When one part of your body is in motion, your whole body is in motion. Change direction if you haven't done so already, but changing what's happening in your center. If the center of your body is like the hub of a bicycle wheel, then both your arms and the foot that's moving, the leg that's moving, are like spokes in the wheel. And bring your feet down. So when we do the more complicated exercises, it should encourage us to develop this sense of being literally centered. Okay, now rub your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder, arm. The other side. Onto your back. And around your hips. Right on your belly. The upper part of the chest. So the center of your body, and it's dropping down to the ground, represents that quality of stillness. So that quality of stillness is a constant aspect in Tai Chi within the movement. So coming back to standing in a parallel stance, your weight forwards, hips settling back. Again, this sense of just quietening in mind and body. Dropping down a little bit further, using that same movement of hips. And just sort of touching a slightly deeper sense of that root, that stillness, whatever label, there's different ways that we can imagine it. This time, embrace tiger, return to mountain, pushing up. Your arms coming around so they're going to hold the ball against your chest, and then elbows drop, bringing your hands in and sinking down again. So you're inevitably, once you're aware of the pull of gravity through your body, and once you have an idea that you're not going to get into a fight with it, sooner or later in the expanding, the upward movement, you will notice that you're about to stiffen up. And that's when we start to return. So there is within this cycle of yin yang a regular sense of returning to our root, to that quality of stillness, of silence, of calmness. One more time. And shake out. Lovely. Thank you very much, as always. I just